Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to current events. And the biggest current event today is Hamas's savage, brutal, and despicable attack on Israel. Unprecedented since 50 years, since the Yom Kippur War, we have not seen this level of violence against the state of Israel. Things are escalating, it seemingly. We want to know what the politicians on the ground are thinking, what the military strategy is going to be. Hezbollah seems to be now joining into the fight in the north. What is the international community thinking, and what's going on the ground? So the topics in order that we're going to be roughly discussing with our special guest, especially from Israel. Roughly those. I don't need to get into the particulars that are in the email. They're too long and too extensive, and I don't want to read them through. I want to deal directly with Gilad, our guest, who's visiting us here via video, and to give us sort of a play-by-play of what's happening. Tell us what's currently going on. Even to refresh those who maybe are new to the events that are happening in Israel. What happened? What's being done about it now? Can you give us an update so far, Gilad?
Yes, hello, Mark, and hello everyone else and everyone watching. So first of all, this is not my profession. I'm not the best guy to get exactly step-by-step the vision of what happened, but I can tell you my experience and everything that I've been reading and hearing around me since this whole thing started. And it started on Saturday, so that's 4 days ago or 3.5 days ago. And you have said that we have not seen anything like it since the Yom Kippur War of 50 years ago. So that's not really accurate, because I think that we've never seen anything like it at all. Or maybe in the Independence Day, like Yom Kippur, I think many people died. I think it was like 2,500 deaths on the Israeli side. I think pretty much all of them were soldiers. Like, that's not what happened on Saturday. On Saturday, we had deaths of, I think the total death count right now is 1,000. I bet 800 or 900 of them are civilians. And it's not death by bombing. It was death by commando unit of Hamas, and also just like random people who are like infatuated with hatred and anger and the desire to destroy. They came to Israeli not settlements, to Israeli towns, to like towns that have been there since the establishment of Israel, and they massacred everybody, and brutalized it. Like, they decapitated heads of babies. Like, that's what I've been told.
So they breached the wall, and one of the first things they attacked was a music festival filled with young people enjoying life, unarmed. These people were unarmed, of course, and they were attacked by these savages.
That music festival is actually that's a place that I could have gone to. Like, I go to festivals like that. I've been to festivals like that. I had people, like, luckily I didn't have any close friends on that specific festival, but I did have like friends of friends. I had a close friend of mine was in a festival just next to that one. So at the beginning, like, we didn't know what happened. And yeah, I've been, from what I know, one of the reasons Hamas chose that day is because of the festival, because they knew that would be a place that they could also rave, but rave on the souls of other people.
Like the mass shooters and maniacs in America who go to places where they know lots of people are going to be unarmed, so they can build up lots of casualties to make a public statement of some kind. Morgan, I know we were supposed to deal with the international issues first, so I do want to get back to that right now, because we just got a personal point of view we got an inside look, and now the international community, right, for the most part, is reacting with horror, justifiable horror. But we're already starting to see the rumbles. I think within the UN that perhaps the Israeli response is violating international law. We're seeing protests in the streets of London. We're seeing protests in the streets of New York. Not protests, celebrations in some respect, as Razi corrected me in the last show, where people are celebrating what Hamas has done as a good thing. Where do you think this is leading? What do you think of the international community's response thus far? Do you think it will change, as it always has, once Israel starts to defend itself?
Yes, I do think it will change. I didn't necessarily think so yesterday, actually, because I agree with what you said, Gilad, that this is kind of unprecedented in its scale. And yesterday, I don't know, I felt a little bit more like people would see just how terrible this is and would act accordingly. But so the US, the UK, the EU, some EU states have voiced support for Israel generally, but there's also been lots of statements which have been calling for peace, either pro-Palestine or have been calling for peace, calling for a ceasefire so that normalization talks can continue. Those have come from Russia and Turkey and China, the UAE, so all reputable sources, obviously. And as you say, Mark, from the EU, from the UN, is it Volker Turk, who's the UN human rights chief, has criticized the blockade of Gaza, and saying that is a violation of international law. So yeah, I think it is already turning, and it's disappointingly quick. So I do think it will change. I just wanted to then, Gilad, we were talking earlier, because I asked you what was your perspective on other countries' reaction to Israel, and you had something kind of interesting to say. I don't know if you just want to address that.
Okay, first of all, it seems to me that the main thing that guides like the international mindset, or the mindset of most people, is who is the strongest side, like who is the David and who is the Goliath. And until today, for the last few decades, like we were the Goliath, we were the big, strong army against the small and weak Palestinians. And now they've managed to really hit us out, like really, a painful hit. So for a second, or for maybe a week or two, they are the Goliath. So the world is with us, instead of really realizing that it's not the question of whose side is stronger. It's the question of which side is actually about life and about progress and about being able to communicate and maybe solve some issues in a civilized way, and which side is just generally, I'm generalizing, but which side is about hatred and about education for hatred. And I think many events in the past, but specifically the events of Saturday, really makes it clear that one side is just led by savages.
Yeah, Marco and Richard, it's very clear that David and Goliath ethics seem to enter into the metric for the left for determining who's good and who's bad. If you're big, rich, and powerful, you're bad, no matter what. No matter what your ideology, no matter what your ethics. If you're poor and decrepit and not thriving, it's obviously because the Goliath has his foot on your neck, and that's why you're not succeeding. It's not because of the values your culture embraces. It's not because of the political values your culture embraces. It's somebody else's fault, and that, in the minds of these people, gives the David carte blanche to do anything they want to the Goliath. And every kind of savagery is justified by the fact that this David is in the place they're in because the Goliath is in the place they're in, and they want to see the change in sides. What do you think about that? Is that an accurate description of leftist simplistic moral view?
For sure, yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's missing the essential every time. And I think it's a mis-analysis between the little guy and the left believing it's for the little guy in ordinary life, and transposing that onto country level with no further analysis, no further depth of thought than such a shallow analysis as that. I think in terms of the response to how different groups and different leaders and politicians have responded internationally, I think a lot of it depends on their pre-existing position. And in the first few days, what you tend to see is very generic statements, very safe statements. You'll see like the like contractually obliged need for condolences, and then a very bland, very limited statement about self-defense without ever defining what self-defense is, means, or how it should be enacted, and then quickly back onto home turf of saying that both sides should call for peace and the moral equivalence that you see there. I mean, today, at the moment, there's the Labour Party conference, the opposition party conference going on here in the UK, and the opposition leader called Hamas a terrorist organization on the stage and got an ovation from the front few rows. And the camera panned in very closely to make sure that, you know, the audience watching could see the front few rows were standing and agreeing with his statement. This is something the BBC is perhaps yet to do. They're still been leaning towards calling them militants every time, not terrorists. But it's apparent outside the Labour conference and in those other rows that there is a big split on this for sure, and lots of Palestinian flags outside the conference, and anyone going to that conference cannot go in without passing 100 protesters waving Palestinian flags.
But personally, I'm slightly uncomfortable with the Goliath David comparison, because it doesn't take an expert in ethics to see the image we've seen across the weekend to work out where the good and the bad is. There's no ideological excuse that can make somebody say, "Oh, Israel is being too harsh on Gaza," and there's nobody who could ever say that those savages who attacked Israel aren't just animals. It's on video. You can see it. If you got the stomach for it, you can actually see what happened. And who can claim, "Oh, we're just supporting the underdog"? That's just pure, utter evil.
Entire communities of people can, and that troubles me as well, because this seems to be an issue that should be self-evident. It should be self-evident, and yet it is not. I think because people are blinded by this idea that the Palestinians are where they are because a richer, more powerful people has placed them in that situation and refuses to take their boots off their neck. This is false. But how do we convince? I don't know that you can convince the diehard folks about it, because I think they're in general anti-West, anti-capitalistic, and hate. They're just driven by envy and hatred. But how do you convince that student that's hearing this in Harvard or Yale or some of the other big Ivy League universities, where their professors, they entrust them with bestowing knowledge on them? Their professors are saying pro-Hamas, anti-Israel sentiments. They're teaching them these things. How do you convince them as an objectivist that they're wrong, that this is immoral?
That's a huge question, but an argument that I always kind of try to use is to remind people that they can judge something or measure, even if they don't know all the particulars. If you have two piles of sands and one is very big and the other one is small, even if you cannot really measure the amount of grain sands or the exact height or width or whatever, you can see with your eyes that one pile is huge with so many offenses and attacks and hatred, and the other one, yeah, some stuff are wrong, but generally it's not so bad. And that's the situation here in this conflict. Like, Israel has done some wrongs for sure, but from the establishment of Israel, in pretty much every document, the country is talking about peace. You don't have anything like it on the other side. So, and it goes through all our history. So it's really hard. Yeah, it goes to the question, can you look at something and without knowing every little detail, just like get the general picture when there are like massive signs pointing to a specific way.
So Morgan, yeah, there are massive signs. It seems perceptual, almost a perceptual level, as we've said, and yet there are people who have this outlook about the United States as well. They highlight the sins, they forget the principles that animate the government and the aspirational nature of the country, and they do the same thing with Israel. And they put the sins entirely on one country and forgive the other side for everything that it does. How can we reverse this? Can we reverse this?
Well, I don't know. I think an awful lot of what goes on is context dropping. And the context that is dropped is that one side is the aggressor and one side is the victim of the aggression. And when you see people like the Pope, who's another person who's made these comments, saying, I just care about civilian lives, I just want there to be peace so no more civilians die, that is dropping the context, because that's in effect drawing a moral equivalence between both sides. Whereas the context is that one side started this attack. One side stormed through the gates or came over in paragliders and killed those kids at the festival and started all of this and launched rockets and so on and so forth. And that is the side which needs to be defeated. And the way Hamas operates is by using civilian shields, by stationing rockets in hospitals and in schools. That's attested to by the UN, who is now coming out and sort of gingerly starting to criticize Israel. So there is no way for Israel to defend itself without potentially incurring civilian casualties. And in a way, maybe you could make some ground with university kids. I don't know. Is another idea which would be very trendy amongst them is of victim blaming, of not blaming the victim. When it comes to cases of sexual assault or something like that, they'll be very articulate about saying, you can't blame the victim for this kind of thing. Well, as in war as well, you can't blame the side which is aggressed against. They have the right to defend themselves. So those are my thoughts. But and something else, Gilad, I just wanted to come back to you as well, because we were just talking about there being a tension in the international community about who's pro-Israel and who's kind of against Israel defending itself. And you said earlier as well that that tension exists within Israel. There are some people who don't feel comfortable supporting Israel's self-defense.
It's well known that Hamas and other organizations, Hezbollah and Iran and other forces within the Gaza Strip and the Western Bank, they hate us. They want to destroy us. It's whole organizations that were established just for that. And we have let them exist for the last, 20, 30, 40 years. Why is that? Why don't we as a country understand that we have a right to annihilate them? And I think the answer is that the same misconceptions and unclear moral principles that cause the rest of the world to not understand who is the right side also cause the same thing here within us. The left, the same trends that existed in the United States, the same trends that caused the US to try and go save Afghanistan and all kinds of other territories and bring democracy to them. The same mentality also exists in Israel. And actually, this leads me to a question that I would like to ask you guys, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, if you'll open the news, you're probably gonna be seeing other interviews with Israelis, with soldiers, with reporters from Israel. You're not gonna catch a lot of objectivists talking on the news. So me, as an objectivist, I have love for this country. I certainly have love for a lot of the people, a lot of my friends, of my family who live in this country. I've served in the army. My brother right now is in the reserve service and may, end up risking his life. But I'm angry about this country. Why isn't my country? Why don't they realize that we should just, kick them down until they're not a threat to us? So should I stay here now during this war that started? Do I want to be here in my house when rockets fall down, when the infrastructure stops working, when who knows what is going to happen? Should I run? These are questions that I think more people other than objectivists have thought about in the last few days. But I know that I've thought about it. I know about other objectivist friends who have thought about it. Should I buy a ticket and get out of here so I will not suffer in the next few months for the mistakes of the rest of my people and the rest of of our government? So what would you do? Would you stay or would you go?
Unfortunately, Gilad, we have the same issues here. Our country suffers from a lack of moral clarity and a lack of self-esteem. And I remember right after 9/11, this may sound ironic now, right after 9/11, a friend of mine who was right on the cusp of the age to serve wanted to join the military. I said, don't. I understand the sentiment, but you're just going to be a pawn in a wider geopolitical game that will not be about defeating the enemy. I said, I would just as soon fight for the IDF because they were clear. Now, this is back in 2001, where I thought the IDF and Israel was clearer about its mission to annihilate some of these savages. They're not. But this condition exists all across the free world. We are morally paralyzed. Would I stay? Yeah, I'd have to submit this to the panel. I don't know that I would, given the lack of confidence that I would have in our government to stand with moral righteousness behind what they're going to have to do to end the violence permanently. I don't see the political will to end Hamas. I see words now in the media where they're now coming to the conclusion that Hamas has seen its final days. But will that be a reality? I don't know that there's the political will. Marco, Richard, what do you guys think?
Well, first of all, one of the reasons why the EU gave such a lukewarm statement is because the leaders right now are in Oman trying to make a deal with the Gulf countries. So guess what's going to come out of it? The issue is, even if you leave, or even if you fight, even if you destroy Hamas, what is Hamas? It's just an offshoot of a bunch of nutty Islamists. And how many of those are around? Even if you destroy Hamas, another group will come up, and fueled by the same ideology. Again, Islam, it's in its holy book to destroy Israel, to kill infidels. I mean, it's black and white. What can you do? How can you? What kind of military strategy can you adopt? And you destroy Hamas, you flatten down West Bank, you do what you like, but the problem is still there. I mean, Europe in particular right now, I think, has got a massive demographic issue. Just here in Britain, for example, the last 10 years, we've had an increase in 1.3 million Muslims in the last 10 years. Islam is one of the largest religions, and these guys are not really open to appeasement and conciliation the same way the Christians and other cultures are. They know what the religion stands for, and they follow it through. That's part of the issue.
And you've seen some of the large crowds gathered in, like in the Kensington High Street and near Marble Arch, coming from those communities, and celebrating is sadly the only word to describe it. You know, euphoric in many ways in the face of such evil. And
part is tribalism. People see the right flag, so they immediately react with the Palestinian flag. Some of it, but most of it is they actually mean it, and that's the serious issue that nobody's looking at tackling.
In answer to your question, though, I mean, I think it's important that you're asking this already, and that is at the forefront of your mind. And only over time will you be able to judge what the right thing to do is based on the context of the situation and where you are and what you think the immediate future is. I think, obviously, your own life is always paramount. and you don't want to be self-sacrificing to a cause over your life when there is the option to live a life and continue a resistance somewhere else. So that is the enormously difficult balance to strike, and I wouldn't presume to tell you when or how to judge it, but only that obviously that is the question that I would ask myself, imagining as much as it's possible what I would do in your situation.
Indeed, Morgan. What do you think? With moral certainty on the enemy's side, on the side of the savages, and no moral certainty on the side of the innocents, the people who are defending themselves, would you stick around in such a situation, or would you leave?
I think I would leave. If the UK were attacked by such a group, I mean, the UK is attacked at least in the last 10 years by such terrorist groups, but let's say there was a proper war that was going on. I don't think I would stay. I don't think my country has done the sufficient things to earn the loyalty that could risk my life. As for whether if I were in Israel, if I was an Israeli citizen, I would stay or potentially join the army. I think you hit it right on the head, Mark. I think it's the lack of moral certainty. I think if what you could feel confident in was that Netanyahu was going to use the IDF to crush Hamas and to make sure this would never happen again, I think there's a plausible case for many people to join the army. Maybe not everyone. Everyone has to weigh it up in the context of their values, as you were saying, Richard. But I think then it would be very plausible to say that you should at least stick around, if not join the army. But given that, in all likelihood, it seems the best thing that's going to happen is some of Hamas is going to be killed, and this is probably going to grind to a halt again, and we're going to get to another situation where, this is just going to grind to a halt and then re-emerge in a few years. I think risking your life for that, I can't see how that could be justified.
I agree. Now, it sickens me that that's probably the cycle we're going to follow. But Gilad, I want to address this to you. Ashley Shrugged for $1.99 said the Pakistani UN rep's remarks were despicable. The remarks were this. Zimam Mahdi said the ongoing conflict is a, quote, sad reminder of more than 7 decades of illegal foreign occupation, aggression and disrespect for international law, including the UNSC resolutions, most of which I find to be horribly ridiculous. And he further said efforts to formalize and perpetuate illegal foreign occupation are breeding violence. Now, part of the reason these savages feel so entitled or to their perspective are morally certain is because they view themselves as under military occupation, as under the boot of the Israeli people, and that they are in justifiable rebellion. And that's the way some of these pseudo Marxists and other malcontents see it as well. Can you refute this concept of occupation? I think I can, but I want to hear it from somebody from the inside, because it's just so utterly false, and yet it drives the narrative.
That's a complicated question, at least for me. I think it starts from the beginning. From 1948 and from the decades beforehand, when more and more people came from around Europe and around the world, more and more Jewish people came to this land and settled it. It's perceived as if it was taken from the Arabs. It wasn't taken. People came here and bought territories and established communities on them. Like, how much more fair could it be? And also, like, not only that they didn't, push people out, but they paid money to people who voluntarily sold land to them. Often we have to say at usurious prices, like extremely high prices, way above market value. By the way, it was my family. My great-great-parents came to a few different places on the early 1900s and bought land and settled here. And this is not the way the Arabs saw it. They saw them as aggressors. They attacked. They had to protect the new land constantly because people did not accept that they are there, even though it wasn't a crowded place. Today, in the entire land of Israel, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, I think it's around 14, 15 million people living in this area. Back then, I think all of it together was less than 2 million. So now we have 6 times more people on the same territory. It wasn't crowded. There was really enough place for everyone. They attacked basically only out of spite, only out of hatred. And I think that continued to them attacking and attacking and attacking and using every opportunity that they had to build something to attack us. So even the Gaza Strip, the occupation that we have on the Gaza Strip was part of Israel up to, I think it's 18 years ago. It was part of Israel. There were Israeli settlements or Israeli towns in the Gaza Strip. And then we decided to move out of it and to let them do whatever they want to do over there, including let them run an election. And instead of building something, they created a war zone, a base for more and more terror groups to shoot rockets and to dig tunnels. And they do all of this while they are getting electricity, water, and all sorts of goods coming in through the Israeli border. So they use the concrete that, the materials that come in trucks from Israel to build tunnels. And this is an occupation. It's not an occupation. It's us partially trying to defend ourselves, and not finishing the job of really defending like we should. So this is how it looks like. It's a mixed protection, and people see it as an occupation when it really isn't.
Well, it's because there's fences, and they think fences mean apartheid, but a fence built to protect an innocent population from one that is militantly aggressive are two different things. Now, Morgan, do you know anything about this myth of occupation, of foreign occupation? And if so, can you refute it? Because it is the main source of the negative narrative against Israel.
Perhaps not quite as well as Gilad just did, but an occupying nation has soldiers in the country and has taken over the governmental role. So when Germany occupied France in the Second World War, that is what happened. They forcibly subdued that population and kept them in submission. That is not what I can see has ever happened in Israel, that Israel has set up a country, a rights-respecting country, that's modern and progressive in a good sense of the term. And the people who are launching this attack and who are annoyed that Israel has ever popped into existence, that's what they're rejecting. They would like to go back to what was there before. And so they have no justification in doing that. So if they then claim that these lands have been occupied, and often it's brought into the fact that the British helped establish the state of Israel, apparently, and all this kind of thing. All I can see is that the use of the concept occupation is a rationalization for hatred of Israel. I think it's a tool to try and justify how they feel. I don't think it's actually got any legitimate basis.
Yeah, when they talk about, Marco and Richard, when they talk about foreign occupation, what stuns me is that for about 19 or 20 years, Egypt and Jordan held the Gaza and the West Bank. They probably could have solved this refugee issue, this problem of extreme poverty within that Palestinian community, a Palestinian identity that also didn't come up until the mid-20th century, by the way. But they didn't. And when Israel reclaimed those areas, is this what they're trying to claim as an occupation? Even though the two countries illegally annexed and did not take care of the population, the Egyptian and Jordanian populations there, in order to defend itself against more aggression, Israel had to reoccupy territories. I'm using the term occupation only in that they had to set up barriers of defense against the Arab nations that were coming up against them. Why don't people see those kinds of military moves as necessarily defensive and moral movements? And Gilad, I'll ask you, during that period from late 1960s on, would you consider that a military occupation of those zones, and were those areas run any differently than the rest of Israel? Is this what the other side is trying to use as their moral rationalization?
I think sorry.
I'll just add, so you will know, that occupation isn't just a concept in regards to Israel, isn't just a concept used in foreign, for the foreign mindset. It's very prevalent here in Israel. Pretty much every weekend, you'll see many Israelis standing in main crossroads in Tel Aviv with signs about occupation, like in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's the kibush. And you hear that all the time: occupation, occupation, kibush, kibush, from Israelis blaming us. So that again shows how much of we as a people, we are not sure that we are right. We don't have the clarity that this is our land. That we have a right to live here because we have built something, and that we did not take anything from anyone.
And Gilad, if I'm not mistaken, many of those people who claim to be indigenous, because that's a huge thing now, indigenous populations somehow have a moral sanction to do pretty much anything. Many of those people are transplants from Jordan and transplants from Egypt. They themselves came to the Israel to benefit from the tremendous economic prosperity that was happening as a result of a more or less democratic state establishing property rights and establishing real thriving industry in that area. Am I wrong? So many of these people that claim to be indigenous and primary inhabitants of the land were in fact themselves foreigners coming over to take advantage of the great prosperity that was coming to an area that wasn't prosperous before.
Are you talking about some of the Palestinians?
Yes, the Palestinians who came over from Jordan and came over from Egypt and tried to prosper themselves from the stuff that was happening.
I'm not sure. I know that a lot of them were like kind of wandering tribes or families, so they moved around the entire area. Anyway, I just don't see it relevant. Like when Jewish people came here to this land, they legally and voluntarily purchased land from other people. They were not aggressive towards, like I'm sure you can find incidents of aggression, but there wasn't any persistent and repetitive attacks by the Jewish side. Generally, they were peaceful and trying to build and create something. And, we have the evidence for it. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever visited Israel, but if I go right now from my house, in 10 minutes on my bicycles, I'm going to get to the Microsoft. Or first, I'm going to get to the Apple office and then to the Microsoft office. If I'm going to get on a car and I'm going to drive 10 or 15 minutes more, I'm going to get to the Google office and to the Facebook office and to the Amazon office. And all of this is evidence that we were here to build and create on lands that we have purchased, and we didn't take anything from anyone. So I think that's the relevant part.
I agree with you. I've been to Israel and it was transformative for me. It is a beautiful, free country. And any of the people celebrating and or protesting in favor of Hamas would be able to do that in Israel. They would not be able to be pro-Israel in Gaza or the West Bank without serious repercussions. Marco and Richard, what do you think about this occupation thing? I'm so tired of hearing that word.
I think the issue is it requires a depth of knowledge, and people don't have depth of knowledge. They don't have the minds to even inquire. And certainly when it comes to the left, in the same way that people will trot out phrases like the world is on fire in an environmental context, they'll repeat the phrase they've heard from other people that Gaza is an open air prison. And that's something I've heard repeatedly or seen repeatedly in text at the moment, as if it's an open air prison and people are it's inaccurate, and it's a testament to the fact that people don't analyze things properly, don't wish to know. And they don't wish to know because it'll conflict with their own narratives. It'll force them to look inward. It'll force them to analyze themselves, and that terrorizes that terror. People have a terror of that.
And of course, the Gaza Strip itself belonged to Egypt. They gave it to Israel because they didn't know what to do with it. They knew it was a hot potato. They gave it to Israel to deal with, and Israel, in order to protect itself, built a wall around it because these guys are not very friendly. And then, as Gil was mentioning, you can see the contrast between the Gaza Strip, the buildings in there, and the buildings just on the other side of the wall. I mean, that's a world apart. You were talking civilization versus prehistory.
And might I say that the Palestinians get hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid. And where has that gone? Has it gone towards infrastructure? Has it gone towards building schools, hospitals, building a better community, or making a better socio-political system? No, it's enriched plutocrats who live in Qatar. They don't even live in Gaza anymore, but they command Hamas nonetheless. And they encourage this militant, aggressive state to fight Israel, to attack Israel. So they've had ample opportunity to be civil.
Guess who the largest contributor to the Gaza Strip is? The EU, with about 700 million euros every. I think I don't know exactly what time scale, but 700 million. And they argue, well, it's not going to Hamas. Oh, really? Because you know where the money goes, do you?
They have a belief that if you stick the word humanitarian in front of something, it's automatically good. No questions need to be asked. It's therefore going to the right place. Whereas, I mean, we fully know during COVID, they can't trace billions spent in COVID within their own countries. How can they possibly measure what the end destination is for money sent in this manner? And one of the interesting things about the EU response to this was in the first few, I think it was on Monday, at about 6 p.m. on Monday, one of the EU commissioners said, we'll be stopping all aid of this type to the Palestinians. Within 5 hours, they'd reversed that as the EU and said, no, we won't be doing that at all. So they're already in conflict with themselves about what their aim is. They don't because they're so embedded in their existing network of requirements for getting oil from Arab countries, etc., that they're unable to stay on one message, even for the sake of a few hours, even after the horrendous events of the weekend.
Unbelievably ugly. Go ahead.
I would love talking to you guys about the Israeli army. So I think you all know that we have mandatory service over here. That people, kids, basically, we finish high school and we get drafted to the army. And I was drafted. I was drafted, but I also volunteered in some sense. Like I was okay with being drafted. So many people want to do that. And I think it's interesting because I think that's one of the reasons that we found ourselves in the situation of such an attack that managed to hit us so hard. I think that's one of the more reasons, but one of the reasons that we were not prepared for this situation is that the forces who sit there next to the borders are mostly kids that not really want to be there. We don't, as soldiers, you don't see it as your profession. You don't have real aspirations in the army. It's just something that you do to prove yourself and to the country that you are a hero and to do your part. So it comes with some lack of professionality. With that being said, some soldiers are young and very talented and they get to the highest level, but many aren't, and I think it contributed to what happened. On the other hand, I've since this war, since this brutal attack, I've received countless messages from friends around the world. Many of them are objectivists that I've met in conferences that are friends of mine, and they were worried. And one of the questions that many of them, knowing that we have a mandatory service, one of the questions that they asked me was, is there a chance that I will be drafted to the reserves force? And I think it's interesting to know that, officially there is, you get called to the reserves force and you have to go. But that's not the reality of what's happening right now in Israel. People who are soldiers, they are literally running to the bases and doing whatever they can to get their gear and to be ready for combat. So on the one sense, it's a mandatory service and liberties, and it harms liberties of people, and it causes all sorts of lack of professionality. But on the other hand, people voluntarily want to fight for the country, and that's what we've seen in the last few days. And friends of mine have just picked up, a bag with a few stuff and went to the base, and so did my brother.
Yeah, an all-volunteer force is more efficient. And yes, when something this terrible happens, generally people are going to want to fight to protect their own. You don't necessarily need the draft to do that. I just want to deal with a couple super chats here and then ask a final question because we have a hard out in a few minutes. Tom Kozial gifted one Ayn Rand Center UK membership. Thank you. Catherine with $1.99. The crying emoji. Yes, this is a very sad last couple of days. Wes Stewart, $10. Thank you, sir. And Nicholas De Jong for €10. Very grateful to you for doing these shows. It means a lot to me that you at least see the moral issue here. ARCUK is the best channel for whoever wants to know what this war is about. I also encourage you folks to listen to anything Yaron Brook is saying out there. I think he is great on the history of Israel, the history of the entire Middle East. And he has some very unconventional and interesting things to say about this topic. So also tune into him and retweet this stuff, put this stuff out there in social media so that this message can get out there to the world. I already dealt with Ashley Shrug. Thank you, Ashley. Eyal R for 30 shekels. Thank you very much. And Waz Art, thank you, John, for $3. Folks, so I want to ask one final question. We've already alluded to the fact that we don't think the world sentiment will stay in the condition that it's in, which is for the most part pro-Israel. Right now, they're inundated with the savage news and some of the pictures that the Hamas fighters gleefully took of torture and murder and savagery. But there will probably come a time when that experience will end and they will start to reverse their positions against Israel. This has been the way it's gone for decades. Morgan, do you think that's the way it's going to be now? And is there a possible way to keep us on track to take Hamas out completely and Hezbollah and hopefully even Iran?
Do I think there's a way that we can make sure that Hamas is taken out? Well, from outside of Israel, I think the most that we can do is lend our moral support to Israel, and that when people within our own countries put pressure on the government to condemn or to claim that all they want is a ceasefire and to save civilian lives, or say all of this rubbish, we can stand up and say that we don't think that's true, and we can articulate the case as we've done now. And then I think we just, by supporting Israel, we get out of the way. We don't stop them from doing what needs to be done. And then you asked something else. How do we eventually take care of Iran? I think did you also say?
Or should we? I mean, can we? Will that be an eventuality?
I think that's a conflict that has been decades in the making. I don't know how it will eventually manifest, but to be honest, that's something that's a conflict which should have happened. when Salman Rushdie was attacked back in, or had the fatwa leveled against him in 1989, or when he was attacked just a year ago. That it was an assassination order put by the Iranian government against a British American citizen, Indian citizen as well. Why didn't those three countries then take them out? Because they can't be allowed to do that. And actually, although the international community should probably get out of Israel's way, Hamas has just killed 10 British citizens in Israel when they stormed over the border. They killed, I think, a comparable number of American citizens. So actually, I think even just getting out of the way, I think there's a case for military, not military, but economic aid, or aiding Israel in whatever way that we can. It's very clearly in our interest to do so, and perhaps even that applies to Iran as well.
Marco and Richard, when I hear a British and American citizens were murdered by a terrorist group like Hamas, I'm all for destroying that organization completely, wiping them out and letting them know that you cannot hurt anybody, let alone American and British citizens, without death and destruction coming your way. Do you think that the international community is going to turn against Israel, or can we keep the momentum going in the proper direction?
I think overall, in the next few months, we'll see people turning away from Israel. But I also believe that some countries, not very many, I think probably Britain among them, will keep supporting Israel. As Morgan said, we shouldn't get in the way of helping them with money, weapons, whatever is required. And also, I'm a bit negative about the possibility of dealing with Iran. If anything else, because the window is closing. They are about to acquire a nuclear weapon facility. So we haven't got much time if we want to strike them. I think at the very least we should tighten the sanction, economic sanction, much harder than we're doing now. Certainly we shouldn't buy oil and gas from them.
I think you're going to see an increasing weakening of support for Israel, much as I don't want to see that. Obviously, I want to see the opposite. But I think you're going to see a lot of fence sitting, a lot of people who will try and play for the long term, push it in the long grass, equivocate, even if they won't come down on one side or the other. I think it's up to us as individuals, and as time goes on in the electoral cycle coming up, to look at the candidates that we vote for and their position on this, and weigh that in as one factor in making our decision at the ballot box as well. But if the evasion of big problems such as Iran never makes them go away, and this is a long-term issue, and it's also the population of Muslims across the world, in particularly spread all across Europe, which is affecting the decisions of governments when it comes to making decisions on the international stage. That is an underspoken about issue, and that is the unspoken truth of what is really holding many countries back from stating the moral position they should.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to Larry Green and Robert Nasir for their $5 contributions. Whichever the way the world goes, Gilad, I want you to know that we as an objectivist community are behind you. Israel is the only free state in that region. It deserves our support, our total and absolute commitment to liberty and individual rights. I wish you the best. Please take care over there. Be safe. For all of you watching this content, like or subscribe. We need to spread these ideas around. People need to get moral clarity on this. We have a show coming up, the Fountainhead Book Club for ARC UK members. The session will also be live streamed to YouTube members. That's coming up in 5 minutes. So in that 5 minutes, do me a favor, folks, check your premises. All right. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.